Hi, my name is Jessica Ream Hall, and I'm one of the local artists in residence with BreckCreate. Typically, my open studio hours are Sundays from 3:30 to 6:30, but I'm coming to you from my home studio today to teach you how to make a t-shirt pillow. Or, of course, if you don't have an old t-shirt that you're wanting to cut up, feel free to get a little creative. Look around your house and see what other fabric you might have sitting around that's not being used. Maybe it's an old pillowcase, maybe it's an old tea towel or dish towel, or maybe you have some old sheets or scraps of fabric left over from other projects. So really allow your mind to kind of run wild with creativity and see what you can use from around your house. In addition to an old t-shirt, you're gonna need a few other things. These are the items I'm gonna be using. If you can find an alternative in your house, if you don't have exactly what I have, feel free to use those as well. So first off, you're going to need a marker and pencil, or one or the other if you don't have both. You need a pair of scissors. Remember, these are sharp, so we're gonna be really careful with these. You're going to need some floss or thread. Now, this is DMC floss. It's not the floss that you use to floss your teeth, of course, but this is typically used for cross stitching. And then this is typically used for sewing, kind of your typical standard roll of thread. Now, if you have something else instead, maybe you choose to use some yarn. As long as it's gonna fit in the eye of your needle, you can use it, so don't worry. Speaking of which, you are gonna need some needles. You want to make sure that the eye of the needle, again, is going to be large enough to fit whatever your thread or yarn size is. But you don't want it to be so big that it's going to poke these giant holes into whatever fabric you're using. So kind of keep that in mind, maybe play around with it a little bit, test it out, see what's going to work best. You're also going to want some pins. If you don't have pins, don't worry, don't stress. They're not necessary to make this a completed project. They do just help to kind of hold the fabric still and keep it from sliding back and forth as you sew it. Along with that, you're gonna need something to actually fill your pillow with. Now again, since everything is closed, we might not have access to the typical type of craft projects or craft supplies that we would normally use. If you do have stuffing, feel free to use that. Now, if you don't, a couple other options for this. You can reuse an old pillow. So let's say you have an old pillow sitting in the back closet, you don't use it, maybe you pull it out once in a blue moon when a guest is over. If you wanna cut open that pillow, you can actually use the stuffing inside of that. If you don't have that, you can use your scraps from your t-shirt that you're gonna cut up in a minute. You can use that, kind of tear them up or cut them up smaller and stuff your pillow with that. Maybe you have other scraps of fabric around the house, old socks, other old pieces of clothing that you're not using that you can kind of cut up and use for your stuffing. Other options, you can use beans. Got plenty of beans around the house, I'm sure, right now. You can also use rice. You can use old paper, old newspaper even. You can rip it up, crumple it up real small, stuff it in that pillow. Again, let your mind run wild. Let it be creative. See what you can use around the house and upcycle in that manner to create this wonderful little pillow. So let's get started. Okay, well, welcome back. Now that we have all of our materials, let's get started. So if you are someone who wants to create a pattern so that you don't have to draw directly onto your fabric, I'm going to show you that first. If you prefer just to draw straight onto the fabric, just pause for a moment and we will get to that step next. So to begin with, you're going to kind of decide what size you want your pillow to be. Now, that's going to somewhat depend on how much material you have to stuff your pillow with too. So if you don't have a lot, maybe you make your pillow a little smaller. Personally, I'm gonna make my pillow a little smaller just because I'm thinking of using it more for my needles and as a pin cushion. So I don't want anything super large. So I'm gonna grab my ruler and I'm gonna start in one of the corners. Lay the ruler right against that flat edge. Measure out to the width that I would like. Flip to the other side, do the same thing, line the ruler up, measure the same distance out. For me, I did 5 inches. I'm making my pattern pretty simple. It's just gonna be a 5 by, what is that, 10 and a half, 11 for the standard piece of computer paper. Then using that straight edge or ruler, just gonna draw a line Set that aside. Then using my scissors, going to very carefully, again remember scissors are sharp, we don't want to cut ourselves today. Just very carefully cutting along, setting aside the scrap piece that I don't need and keeping that pattern. Set that aside just for a moment so I can prepare my fabric. So I'm gonna grab my shirt. Mine, part of mine was used for another project, or for the demo for this project actually. So it's a little shorter than your standard shirt, but going to make sure it's all nice and flat. We don't want any of these ridges because we don't want to cut something that's a little wonky or not even with the two pieces. So basically what's going to happen is the front of the shirt is going to be one side of the pillow. The back of the shirt is going to create the other side of the pillow. There's two ways you can cut your pieces of fabric out. If you're using your pattern, you're going to keep the side of the shirt that is decorative, that you want to make sure you cut however it is you're wanting to, facing you. Now my back side of my shirt is completely plain, so I'm really not too worried about any images on the back. If you are, if there's designs on both the front and the back, maybe you cut the front out separately and then the back out separately and combine the two pieces. But for the first step, for the first part or first option for cutting it out, we're just going to have the design facing up. And we're going to place our pattern directly onto the shirt. Now, this is where the pins come in handy. If you don't have the pins, that's okay. I'm going to give you another option. But if you have the pins, very carefully, because these are very sharp as well, don't want to poke your finger with it, you're actually going to pin your pattern directly to the shirt, and you're going to go through both pieces, the front and the back. Can you see that needle there? That way you cut both pieces at the same time. This is going to allow you to make sure the pieces are the same size, same shape, and it kind of just makes it go a little faster. So you would pin one in each corner, here, and then you would cut around. Using your scissors, again, very carefully, lining up, holding it, and cut all the way around. Now, if you don't have the pins, but you still want to use the pattern, what you're going to do is you're actually going to flip the shirt inside out. The reason we're going to do this is because we are going to have to mark on the shirt, and we don't want any of those marks accidentally showing through as we sew the pillow. Now, for the most part, it shouldn't be an issue because there is going to be what's called a seam left on the inside of the pillow. Just like your shirt has a seam here where the two pieces are sewn together, that will be formed on the pillow as well. But just ideally, just to double check, make sure all the things, we're going to lay out the pattern. We are going to grab our pencil if you have that. If your shirt's darker like mine, unfortunately it is the same color as the pencil. You can also grab maybe a white colored pencil. Those work really great. Or you can use a Sharpie. This is another reason I'm marking on the inside of the shirt, because the Sharpie is thicker and I just want to make sure there's no issues. So very carefully holding that pattern down, I'm going to start to trace the outside of the pattern. It doesn't matter if you go all the way around. I like to do opposite sides. Just kind of how my mind works, I guess. And of course, if you accidentally mark onto the pattern, that's okay. That's what it's there for. Then you'll take the pattern off, set it aside. Now again, if you have those pins, you can pin each of the corners of your square, or maybe you made a circle, that's fine too. You can make any shape. Maybe you made a triangle, maybe you made a hexagon. I'm sticking with your basic square just because that's simplest. So you'll pin the corners, making sure that needle doesn't, or the pin doesn't go over the line. You don't want to try and cut the pin. That's not going to work very well. Grabbing your scissors, again, being very careful. Holding both pieces. So again, that pin went all the way through both sides of the t-shirt. Very carefully, you'll cut around, cutting out that square. Now, if you realized you have two sides of a shirt that have decorations or designs on both sides, and the designs you want on your pillow are in two different places, so they don't line up when you fold the shirt or flatten the shirt out together, you'll basically do what I did here for the front, and then you'll flip the shirt over and you'll do the exact same thing on the back so that you capture your preferred designs. There's this last line here. Again, being very careful not to get your fingers. There we go. Now, we'll want to keep this scrap fabric because we might use it to stuff our pillow with. If you're not using it, you just set it aside. Maybe you'll find another project another day to use it for. So, carefully remove the pins. And then pull apart your two pieces just to see what you have. Now again, since my back piece is basically the same both sides, it's okay. I'm not really worried which is exactly the back and which is the front. For my front though, I do have this nice decorative piece that I want to keep. I don't want this to be sewn on the inside of their shirt. So making sure if your back does have that other design you want to keep, make sure that's looking at you. So you're looking at both your pieces here. What we're going to do then is we're going to fold the two decorative sides so that they meet once again. Make sure they all line up. Might take a little bit, sometimes fabric likes to kind of stick together. Mine's being very difficult today. There we go. So you have your two pieces. Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to either A, leave them like they are, or if you know that you have a hard time keeping the fabric together and you have some of those pins, even if you don't have pins, maybe you have a whole section of, or a whole box of needles, let's say. You can even use those. You could get creative and maybe use paper clips if you had to. You can kind of, there's lots of options. But ideally, if you have pins, those are going to be the easiest. So to keep the two pieces together, you're going to repin the shirt. Oop, that needle is not sharp. The pin's not sharp on the end. And you'll go all the way around, maybe every couple inches. There's some pins on there. This way, the fabric's not going to move on you. Make sure to get the corner. Those corners are the peskiest. They like to move or fold in on themselves. And there we go. I'll actually add one more here. And we're good to go. So now I can flip it around. It's going to stay together. It's not going to shift. Now it's going to move. It's going to stay nice and lined up. So next we're going to grab our needles. And then we're going to grab whatever thread or floss we're using. For mine, I'm going to actually use, I'm actually going to use this cross-stitching floss just because you'll be able to see it a little easier. But in the piece that I made before, for the other half of this demo, I actually used this just because it is going to allow me slightly smaller stitches, and it kind of will disappear a little bit. This you might see it on the edges just a little bit when it's all said and done, and I'll show you what I mean as I go. So to make sure you have enough to go around the whole perimeter, the whole border of this pillow, because we don't want to run out halfway. That's the biggest pain in the butt ever. We're going to measure out, so we're going to hold the end, the tail of the floss or the thread we're using. We're going to measure one side, grab where our thumb just was, so there's that length. We're going to measure out the other shorter side, grab where our other thumb was, measure out the long side again, grab where the thumb was marking it, and then measure out that short side again, and then we're just going to add a length on, so a little extra. Ideally with sewing, you want actually a little extra thread or floss or whatever you're using because it's just easier to have extra than to have to go back and restart again. Now, lots of ways you can start the knot on a thread, on the piece of thread or what you're using to sew. You can just wrap it around, tie a knot, and good to go. Personally, I like to do a slightly thicker knot. These knots can be a little thin, and sometimes it might pull through the fabric. a little trick my grandma taught me, and you can practice this a couple times. If it doesn't work, don't worry. Just tie your knot and we'll get started. Is you're going to grab the thread between your pointer and thumb, and then you're going to wrap the thread a couple times around that pointer finger, like so. So you kind of end up having that little tail. It's like a double loop. Then you're going to kind of start to wiggle your thumb and pointer finger together. So you roll that wrapped thread off of your finger. And make sure that tail goes all the way through the loop. And then slowly start to pull it tighter. That'll get you a slightly bigger knot. Typically the knot's a little cleaner than mine just showed right there. But again, it's going to be on the inside of the pillow so you won't see it, so don't worry. If you have a long tail like I just did, you can trim it off and set it aside just so it doesn't get in the way. So then we're going to go to the other end. This end is where the needle's going to be. Again, you want to make sure that your needle, that the eye of it is large enough that the thread fits through. So another little secret to threading it, if, looking the end and trying to stick it in that eye is getting a little too difficult, you're going to pinch the thread between your pointer and middle finger, your thumb, and your ring finger. So you have this bridge of thread, if you will. You're going to take the needle, you're going to slide it underneath and pull up onto that thread. So now you're pinched between your thumb and your pointer. Oops. I'm going to take my other pointer that I'm holding the needle with. I'm just going to hold that thread on there just so it doesn't slide. I'm going to take my other thumb and pointer. I'm going to grab that thread on the needle, so I'm pinching it really tight. I'm going to slowly holding the needle in the other hand. I'm going to slowly kind of start pulling it against that little loop around it, and then slide it out. So I'm still pinching between the thumb and finger, and this is going to kind of fold that thread in half. And then as you slowly start to open your thumb and finger, you can kind of see that there's a little thread sticking out. Maybe you can see that in the camera, maybe not. And then you're just going to line up the eye of the needle with that folded over thread and start to work it through. Now again, this kind of takes some practice. If this doesn't work for you, there's tons of different ways to thread a needle. So if you have your own secret, feel free to do it that way. Don't worry about doing it just like I did if that doesn't work for you. So I'll move this out of the way so we don't accidentally catch any of that. Then we're going to start in one corner. Doesn't matter what corner, I'm just going to pick a corner. And we're going to thread or take the needle through. We're going to sew the needle through and pull it all the way until the knot comes in contact with the fabric. All right. And then we're going to go back and forth through the fabric. So coming out just a little bit, we'll poke the needle from the back side up and then pull that needle through, pull it all the way until the thread becomes taut on the back, and then we'll do the same thing from top to bottom. Now, you don't want to pull it so tight, the thread so tight, that you start to get this. We don't want it cinched up. We want it nice and flat. That might happen occasionally, but if it does, as you saw, it's pretty easy just to reopen it back up. So you're going to do that all the way around your pillow, trying to keep the stitches as even as possible. If they're not perfect, that's okay. You are not a machine. Speaking of machines, though, if you have a sewing machine and you know how to use it, and you can use it safely, or your parents can show you how, if you would like to sew your pillow seam using a sewing machine instead, please feel free. Now you can also see that my stitches aren't very even, and that's okay. I'm not too concerned with getting them perfect. Again, this is going to be hidden. You're actually not going to see too much of this. Now you can see that my stitches aren't huge. We don't want big inch or inch and a half long stitches, because what happens if you open up the seam, you can kind of see that there is a little gap between each stitch. So we don't want that gap to be huge and all the stuffing or the beans or the rice to fall back out. So keep that in mind too. If you are using rice especially, you are going to want to make sure your stitches are a little tighter or a little thinner or not as long, because you don't want those kernels of rice to fall out. So again, you can continue to stitch all the way around. Then, as you come to that final side, you are going to want to leave a little gap. So you're not going to want to sew it all the way through. You're going to want to actually leave it with a little opening, because this is going to allow you to turn the pillow inside out, or right side out, really. And it's going to allow you to add the stuffing. So I am going to show you how to finish off this piece so that you know how to kind of tie it off. So there's a couple more just to close that, just so it's not so big. Again, you can just kind of tie a knot, cinch it down as tight as you kind of, that is easiest for you. One thing I like to do is I like to take the needle, thread it around into this loop. You can kind of see this loop going right here. And here's kind of like the tree, if you will. I'm going to take that needle again and I'm going to stick the point of the needle right where the thread is coming out from the fabric. And then I am going to just gently pull on that loop until it tightens all the way around. And there you go. You have your knot down at the bottom. And then it's not a super long piece. You're not having it the rest of the pillow become loose, etc., etc. So I like to do a couple of these. So there's that loop. There's the tree, holding onto the tree. Put the needle right at the base of the tree. Pull that thread until it tightens all the way. And there you go. And then I just like to trim off the excess, because again, we don't need to have a huge long tail of excess thread underneath or in the pillow. It just gets in the way, but I am going to rethread that because I am going to use that last bit in a minute. So here we are. Flip it over. Both sides are that undecorated side. All the decorative sides are in the inside of the pillow. So we're going to start to flip this inside out. So opening up where that unsewn edge is, we're going to start to just pull the pillow through. And then you can use your hand and kind of open it up, making sure that you get the seam all the way to the corner, fold it in all the way. Now this will be where you can kind of see just how large the holes are with your sewing. And if suddenly you realize, oh man, that hole's just a little too big from what I'm using, you can reflip it, go back around, sew another line around, just following that previous one, and tighten up those holes a little bit. So now you might notice that the corner is kind of rounded, and maybe you like that, and that's cool. If you do, keep it. But if you want to make sure that's pulled all the way as taut as it is, you're going to take one of the corners in your hand, take your needle in the other, and you're going to slowly just start to pull that corner out. You're going to go to the next one and slowly just kind of putting the needle into the seam and gently pulling it out so it kind of comes to more of a nice sharp point. Now, of course, depending on the fabric you're using, it probably won't be perfect, and it's not. It's fabric. It's supposed to be soft. It's supposed to be a little rounded. So there we are. So now you lay out your pillow and you can see, okay, yep, both sides are exactly what I want it to be. Excellent. Now here comes the fun part where we get to actually stuff our pillow. So if you are using stuffing from an older pillow, you might notice that when you pull it out, it's kind of flattened, it's kind of mushed together, it's not fluffy and soft. That's fine, that's how a lot of stuffing is. A lot of times you have to kind of re-aliven stuffing, if you will. There's probably a technical word, I don't know the technical word for it, and that's okay. But all it does is it just requires you to kind of slowly pull at the stuffing. So it kind of fluffs it all back up. So you can kind of see how that's nice and fluffy, and this is flat. This looks a lot more comfortable to sleep on, huh? Or to sit on. So you want to take a moment and do this before you actually stuff any of your stuffing into the pillow. Now, of course, if you don't have stuffing, that's okay. If you're using beans or rice, your stuffing part is going to be a lot faster, a lot simpler. All you're going to do is open the container and pour it in, just making sure you don't fill it so much that you can't sew this closed. So, but if like me, you're using stuffing, you're going to take that wad of freshly fluffed stuffing, and you're going to open up your pillow, and you're going to start to put the stuffing in, and you're going to push it all the way to the bottom. So you're starting filling it furthest point from you. Now, sometimes getting that stuffing into that corner is a little difficult. That's where using your pencil or marker comes in handy, because you can use the dull end or the rounded end. Don't use the point end, you'll poke a hole through your pillow. But if you use the other end, you can kind of use it to fill the stuffing into that corner. And then do the same on the opposite side. I may need more stuffing. Yep, I'm gonna need a little more. So I have a whole pile that I've already pre-fluffed, so I'm not gonna have to re-fluff it each time. And of course, be careful if you made your opening a little too small. You don't want it to rip. All right. And as you do, you're going to kind of have to move it around, get it nice and even. We don't want one side too lumpy and uneven. Now it's up to you however much you want to fill your pillow. It can be filled with more, and it's going to be a firmer pillow, stiffer, harder. Or you can fill it with a little bit less, and it's going to be a little softer, a little more cushiony. So it's all kind of up to you what you would like for your pillow. And this last little bit can be a little weird. Because you're trying to fill it up, you want to make sure there's enough in there, but you want to make sure there's also enough to sew your pillow closed. So here we are. Two ways you can do this. You can either fold that seam in on itself. Oop, I might have got a little too much stuffing in there for me to close this. There we go. You can kind of fold the seam in. It's kind of like, here's the raw edges up, and you're just going to put your finger where the seam ended, and then on the seam on the short end, and just kind of tuck it in. And so you can see it kind of folded in on itself. Or if you like the raw edge look, you can also just match the raw edges together, and the raw edge is the cut edge, and just sew straight across. Either one, both work perfectly fine. But this is where your needle is going to come back in handy with that thread. So again, we'll tie off the end however you want to make that knot. Maybe it's wrapped around the finger, making that knot again, or maybe it's just tying it. Here's the one secret to this though. So whether or not you are folding in or you're allowing the raw edges to sit, you want that knot to be on the inside of the pillow so it's not showing. So you're actually going to take your needle on the inside, sewing into that seam, so poking out from inside the pillow, and then pull the thread taut. So you can see that the knot is now hidden on the inside of the pillow. And then whether you're letting the raw edges rest or you're kind of folding over that seam, I'm going to fold over the seam, so I like that better. You're going to just sew from one side to the next. So just like we did when the pillow was inside out, we were folding that initial seam. We're just going back and forth. And you'll do this all the way down until that seam is closed. Now, if you're having a hard time keeping that seam in place or keeping the two pieces together, this is another great place where you can use those pins. And just like we did at the beginning where we pinned the two pieces of the pillow together to keep them from moving, you can put pins in place to hold the pieces of fabric together as you sew, and then you'll just remove them once you're done. So there you go. So you can see how it looks. All sewn, and that'll be all sewn down. I did mine a little longer than I meant to, so it's going to take me just a little longer to finish. But then there you'll have it. There you'll have your pillow. So now that your pillow is finished, have it all tied off at that final corner, having that final little section all sewn together. You might have to kind of work it around, move all the stuffing out, especially because this side sometimes gets a little thinner since you had to sew it here. You had to push all the stuffing away. Just take a moment, kind of refluff your pillow, and then there you go. There's your nice little t-shirt pillow. So a lot of fun things you can do with this. Like I said, I'm using mine. I was going to make a giant pin cushion. I have pins everywhere. So my little tiny one has been outgrown. So I'm deciding to use mine as like a pin cushion to keep all my pins in. Depending on what shape, maybe you made a really long sock, you could make it as a chew toy for your dog. Just don't let me eat the stuffing inside. If you put rice in it, I like to make really long, thin ones, and then I put it by the door. So if you have kind of a gap underneath your door or a space where you kind of feel colder air coming in, or even around a window, you can use it there, or use it as a body pillow if it's a really giant big one, or just a standard pillow to sleep on. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had as much fun as I did creating this little pillow. Even though it was virtual and not in person, as much as I would prefer that in-person interaction. But we do thank you for still tuning in. Now, if you are looking for other classes to check out and to do by yourself or with your family, definitely go to our website, BreckCreate.org, to see what other options, what other classes, what other fun things you can learn during this time. And tune in there too, because that's when we're going to be able to announce when we're going to be able to open our doors and open our studios to you all again, because we definitely can't wait. So again, that's BreckCreate.org. Stop in there, see what other classes are being offered. There's tons of great offerings, and then keep checking back to find out when we're going to be able to open our doors and our studios to have you come in and join us in person to continue creating together. So until then, stay healthy, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.